through. When you are diagnosed with any kind of chronic illness, you are just usually stated or told about the medical facts. Uh, but there are many difficult realities of living with a chronic illness that usually nobody tells you about, not even your doctors, right? So the isolation and lack of understanding from others, including your family members, including friends, they just don't get it, right? It's not it's difficult for them to get it. The loss of your own life and identity, what you consider to be normal, and that's not the case anymore. The fear that it will get worse, the unpredictability, the uncertainty, the struggle to deal with it on a day-to-day basis, all these are things that nobody prepares you for, right? You're told about the symptoms, about the treatments, about the possible options, and this was certainly the case with our daughter when she was dealing with severe eczema. My name is Anindita, and I am a functional medicine certified health coach and a practitioner, and I help women with autoimmune conditions feel healthy and happy in their bodies using my unique body wise guided framework. So this was certainly true in our case. Whether she was dealt with severe eczema for many years, she was on strong immune suppressive medications and oral steroids for more than 6 years, and even being on these medications only helped her so much. She was only about 6 years old. The constant itching, the wounds, the pain, the sleepless nights. I don't think we slept for almost a decade, right? Because she was so itchy all the time. And mind you, this is after she was actually given steroids and, chemo drugs. And I remember that one time she had so much of infection that she was put on, because when you keep scratching your skin constantly, it becomes raw, there are wounds and you get infected. So this is a constant battle with somebody who has any kind of skin issues, especially severe eczema. And eczema is a particular condition where you are constantly feeling itchy, right? You're scratching, which is why you can't sleep. And this is after being put on medication, right? So that's the other problem. And I remember that she was battling one infection after the other. So she was given one antibiotic course. I think she was already given a couple of antibiotic courses. She was only 6 years old at that time. And I was desperate. I was so desperate because we had tried all the topical creams and everything, whatever I knew at that time. It was only after that I discovered essential oils, etc. But I didn't know, right? So and topical antibiotics and everything, and nothing was helping. It was just not helping. And so it was just not possible to keep on giving antibiotics courses. And so I was so desperate that I actually, because there is a protocol where you can add chlorine, because chlorine is basically bleach, and you can add it in a very diluted form, and it can help kill infections, bacteria, because it is antimicrobial, but it stings a lot. And I actually added that in her bath water, and she was screaming in pain. It was very diluted, of course, but it was still stinging. It was horrible. And it was only after that, of course, that I felt so bad, but it was desperate times and we were taking desperate measures. And it was only after that when I actually started figuring out other things, and we went through a very, very rough patch. This was in 2013 and she was only 6 years old. And one of the medications put her in the hospital because it had a major side effect. But to cut a long story short, so that's when basically I looked for other options, and I found them eventually. But at that time there was seemingly no other option, right? So these are the things that you typically are not told about when when you're diagnosed with any kind of chronic illness, or maybe you've not been diagnosed yet. If you're if you're dealing with autoimmune some kind of symptoms, a lot of times diagnosis takes a long time to come, especially in the case of autoimmune conditions. And so this and it can lead to lack of understanding, isolation, because others don't understand what you're going through, right? It's not possible for someone else who's not been through what you're going through to fully understand why is it that you can't you don't feel your energetic self anymore. Why is it that you don't want to go out anymore? The level of pain that you might be in, right? It's not just possible for others to comprehend what's really going on, because in our case what used to happen very often is that I would feel very tired. Of course my daughter was suffering, no doubt about that, but even as parents we were struggling because we hadn't slept in the night. She was awake, she was scratching. So this used to be a constant thing for us, and for a very, very long time. So this, you lose a lot of things. You don't feel like going out, you don't socialize as much, so a lot of things change, and what you considered normal at one point in time typically actually just completely changes. And we learned how to avoid going to hot and humid places. And because I was trying out different things later on, this was later in 2014, I had taken her of gluten and dairy, and trying to figure out what are the other things that I could do for her that would help her. And it was all like a huge big experiment. But in the initial years when I was trying out all of this, it was so hard that we stopped going out. Like, we stopped socializing, we stopped going to people's houses, because it's hard to explain to somebody what, if she's off these foods, what is it that she's going to have. And people tend to think that there's nothing really, right? If you're taking off gluten and dairy, what else is there to eat? That's not true, of course. But so a lot of these things you figured out how to cope with, and that becomes your normal. And in our case, when we actually accepted that as a normal, that we started and we made peace with it. In particular, I made peace with it because I was the primary caregiver. That's what helped us to cope, right? Because you need to find a way to deal with it in your own way. But I think one of the first things and one of the most important things is to accept that this is the reality right now. By fighting against it, by being in denial, and a lot of people live in denial when they have any kind of chronic illness. They live in denial over their limitations that they have right now, what their bodies are going through, what they are going through, of course, what their bodies, are able to deal with and not deal with, right? And then we keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and that's not really helpful, and certainly not in the case of any kind of chronic illness. But acceptance is the first part, right? And it was only when we accepted that our life had changed, and probably forever, that from that place actually we were able to make certain changes. And I in particular was able to make certain changes. And I taught my daughter to view herself not as a victim, because when you start viewing yourself as a victim, you actually tend to give up, because we start feeling helpless and powerless to do anything. And that's I think a big problem in the conventional medicine world, where people are all typically told that there's not much that they can do, and so they just need to sit back and take medications and just wait for the answers to come from the medical experts. But that's not the case. There's so many things which are in our control, which starts with our food that we put in our mouth, the way we move our bodies, the way we manage our stress, right? So many things which are not in our control, but these things very much are. And I taught my daughter to sort of take that from a very early age, and that's what's helped her over the years, through very, very hard years, to remain empowered, right? That's extremely important, to be strong, to remain strong, to be emotionally intelligent, right? So not to give in to despair completely. I mean, there will be always ups and downs. So these are some of the things that I taught her. I realized myself there's a lot of inner work that I had to do. And of course, because she was a child, she still is, to let her know that she was not alone in this, right? So these are some of the truth about living with chronic illness that no one tells you about, and not even the doctors. So my name is Anindita, and today I am talking to you about what doctors, the ugly truth about living with a chronic illness, and what you're often not told about. What chronic illness is all about, apart from the medical facts and just the medications. But there's so much more to it, right? So many things that happen, and things that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. This is particularly true in the case of the struggles that we face, right? The smallest of things that we face on a day-to-day basis. It's not like another condition which you will get, you can look forward to getting better. Maybe if you have jaundice or malaria, chicken pox, in a few weeks, in a month's time, things will be okay, and you will sort of go back to living your normal life. That's not what happens in the case of any kind of chronic illness, right? So you need to come to terms with some of these things. Doesn't mean that you give in to the despair and that, but it means that to acknowledge the struggle of living with any kind of chronic illness on a day-to-day basis. Because it sometimes feels that we're just not getting a break. We can't come up for air. It can become so bad that, and there's so many times in dealing with my daughter's health issues that I felt, and I was the primary caregiver, so I felt that I just couldn't come up for air, right? I just couldn't breathe. There was no time. It was like you're putting out these fires every single day. You put out one fire, something else comes up, then you put out one, then you put out another, that fire, then something else comes up. Like this, multiple fires, and I know that my clients, when I work with them, I have a client that I'm working with, and she is going through that right now. She's constantly putting out one fire. If she deals with her digestive issues, then her throat has a problem. If her throat, she's been dealing with something else crops up. So like it's this constant thing, and you're chasing diagnosis, you're chasing tests, you're going after one doctor to another doctor, one specialist to another specialist. Like there's no time to breathe, to figure out. And that's the truth. That's reality for dealing with many kind of severe chronic illnesses. And we went through that as a family, and the mental toll that this takes is immense. So these are some of the things that nobody wants to talk about, right? This is the ugly truth that nobody wants to talk about, and you are not told how to take care of your mental health, right? These are not things that I said that are discussed, and we are just told to take medications and manage the physical symptoms, and that's just one part of it. Of course, managing the physical symptoms are important because that provides some relief from the pain and some of the severe symptoms that you might be facing, and some of the symptoms can be debilitating. So we need medications at certain times to help with that, and that's exactly why my daughter was put on medication, because we just couldn't manage. Even though she was so young, her eczema was so severe, we couldn't have managed without it, and it was that gave us some time. Bought us some time while I tried to figure out what else we could do, right? But that realization came much later. Initially, that realization was not there, and she was on, for example, she was already on immune suppressive medication, and her condition was not improving. But what I didn't know at that time is that the condition was not improving because we were not really addressing her true root causes. Right, and we were stuck in what I call a disease merry-go-round. Right, you go round and round in circles, but you're not really going anywhere. You're not making any progress. You're of course on medications, and I believe that would be the solution to her issues. Sadly, that was not true, and it took a crisis to open our eyes, or open my eyes to that fact. But once my eyes were opened, I decided to go all out and do what it takes, because I was giving a second chance. We were given a second chance with our daughter's life. And and that's when I decided to step out of that disease merry-go-round, right? And you can do that too. Knowing this, becoming aware of these ugly truths can actually set you free. And in our case, because the mental toll was immense, and I know that that might be true for you too. Mental health issues come hand in hand with chronic illnesses, because just the stress itself can be so high about dealing with any kind of health challenges, right? And I taught myself emotional regulation. Till that time, I was not really aware that these things were important, that emotional health was important, mental health was. I didn't even know about all these things. And I started to read, because I had to help my child, and I could not help my child about things or teach her about things that I did not know about. So whether it was emotional regulation, whether it was mindfulness, whether it was active stress management, right? I had never really paid much attention to all of this, and I started reading books. That was my way of learning. There's so many different ways now, whether it's podcasts, books, and other resources, reading, etc. And that helped me to cope with my mental stress. There's so much of stress of dealing with what she was going through, and then that in turn helped me to teach her how to do that, right? That helped actually entire family. And that goes for you too. By knowing about some of these things can actually help you to understand how to live, how to cope with these daily struggles, right? And what you realize, and what I realized very importantly, is that the small things, the small wins, that keeps you going, that motivates you to keep. So that certainly motivated us, right? So when I started making these small changes in the diet, initially I saw nothing different, but as I connected the dots between our gut health and skin condition, made changes. And it took a very long time, because I didn't have somebody to help me on a day-to-day basis, or guide me rather. I was working with somebody in the UK, but on a day-to-day basis I had to figure out things on my own, and it took a very long time. But there's small improvements, no matter how small it was, that's what encouraged me to keep going. That's what motivated me, that to let me know that I was on the right path, right? So no matter how big a struggle that we were dealing with, and again, it's unpredictable, it's uncertain, we don't know how long it will take, how the disease will progress. That's another ugly truth about living with a chronic illness. You don't know what the future is like, right? And you can only hope, and hope is what kept us going, and hope is what I gave my daughter, and hope is what I provide for my clients, because I know that they can get better. It's not about curing a particular chronic illness, and that's not how it works. That's not how it worked for my daughter and for my clients, and certainly for you. There may be no cure for any kind of chronic illness, but you can certainly heal from it, because healing happens at different levels. Healing happens at, of course, a physical level, wherein you can reverse many of your symptoms, if not all of your symptoms, and become probably free of pain and suffering. But even if that doesn't happen 100%, healing can happen at an emotional level, as you figure out emotional regulation, as you find out ways to ground yourself, to use your emotions as an inner guidance. So healing can happen at an emotional level, and of course healing can also happen at a spiritual level, right, where you actually start believing that there is something or someone guiding you beyond, so that depends on what you believe in, but there is something to that as well. There is a higher truth, there's a higher power, no matter what you call it. So healing can happen at all these levels, no matter what the diagnosis is, right? So my name is Anindita, and today I've been discussing about, and I'm talking about the ugly truth of living with a chronic illness that doctors don't tell you about, or may not be telling you about. And there's so many things that you need to look out for, and just accepting some of these things, whether it's the isolation and lack of understanding from others. They don't really understand what you're going through, and you have to educate them, you have to let them know. And that is something that I did. I had to first find out, and then I had to let my family know that this is what was going on with our daughter, and this is why I was making the change, and this is how it would hopefully help her. Then loss of the identity, like the way that we were living before had to change, and we didn't like it. It was hard, but that is what it was. We accepted it. It actually helped us to then embrace the new normal, right? And you can do that too. You can figure out what your new normal is. And of course, the living with the unpredictability, the uncertainty, that takes a very big toll. And the struggle that you are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, all these things take a big mental toll. They add to the mental stress, emotional stress of living with any chronic illness. So you need to find ways to cope with that. In our case, I found ways to through books, through my reading, emotional regulation, mindfulness, right? So there's so many ways, meditation, but finding something is important, and you can do that too. I hope that this gives you some idea, this opens your eyes, that this is something that most, if not all, those who are living with chronic illnesses face. Maybe you don't get to hear much about it, but I wanted to share what we went through and what it actually is, what it feels like about living with a chronic illness, in the hope that you also have hope, right? You feel hopeful that things can change. And they can change because there's so many things which are in your power, and you don't have to give and wait for things, for answers, for your tests, for anything, to start putting some things in action. If you liked what I had to share with you today, tag a friend who might need to see the video, who might need to know this truth as well. And I hope that the truth sets you free, and I hope that the truth sets your friend free.